I was 20 years old when I married Carlos. It felt like a fairy tale, meeting in university, falling in love so quickly, and then, just 2 years later, standing together at the altar. We were young, and everything seemed so simple back then. The world was a vast expanse of possibilities, and I believed wholeheartedly that we could conquer it together. Carlos was everything I had ever dreamed of, handsome, charming, and kind. Our first years of marriage were filled with laughter and warmth. We rented a cozy little apartment not far from where we met, and I was working part-time while finishing my nursing studies. Carlos had just landed a great job at a tech firm, which promised stability and a bright future. We were on the verge of something beautiful, or so I thought, as the months rolled by, the weight of reality started to bear down on us. The initial joy of being newlyweds gave way to the relentless pressures of adult life. Carlos's job required long hours, and while I was managing to keep up with my studies and part-time job, the financial strain began to seep into our home. The apartment, once our haven, felt more like a battleground as we started to argue about money, bills, and our future. I remember one evening vividly. Carlos had come home late from work, exhausted and irritable. We sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by the mess of everyday life, dirty dishes, unopened mail, and a growing pile of overdue bills. I just don't understand why everything is so hard, Carlos said, rubbing his eyes. I'm working my ass off, and it's never enough. His frustration was palpable, and I felt helpless. I was trying to balance my responsibilities and was struggling to keep up with the mounting pressures. I'm doing my best, Carlos, I replied, my voice trembling. But we're barely scraping by, as the months went on, Carlos's job started to consume him completely. The long hours and intense stress began to take a toll on our relationship. I found myself spending more time alone, trying to keep the house in order and hoping that things would get better. My heart ached at the distance growing between us, then, the unthinkable happened. The company where Carlos worked went under, leaving him without a job. The news hit us like a tidal wave. Carlos was devastated, and I watched helplessly as he fell into a deep depression. The man who had once been so full of ambition and hope was now a shadow of himself, I was caught in the middle, trying to keep our lives together while comforting Carlos. I took on more shifts at work, hoping that our financial strain would ease. But each day seemed to bring new challenges. Carlos struggled to find a new job, and every rejection added another layer of despair to his already heavy heart, It was around this time that we had to make a difficult decision. With the bills piling up and no immediate prospects for Carlos, we reached out to his father, Roberto. Their relationship had always been strained, and I wasn't sure how it would go. Roberto was known for his sharp tongue and a certain coldness towards Carlos, but we were desperate, Roberto agreed to help, but his terms were clear. He would provide financial assistance, but he would also move in with us to oversee our finances. We had no choice but to accept his offer. It felt like a harsh blow to our pride, but we were at the end of our rope, I remember the first night Roberto moved in. The apartment felt different, his presence seemed to cast a shadow over our once intimate home. Carlos and Roberto barely spoke, and the tension was palpable. I found myself in the uncomfortable position of mediator, trying to keep the peace while silently longing for the days when our biggest problem had been a pile of overdue bills, I tried to see the silver lining. Perhaps having Roberto around would help Carlos find a new job, and maybe the extra support would lighten our financial burden. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to change in ways I couldn't yet comprehend, living with Roberto turned our lives upside down. It was as though a storm had swept through our home, leaving a mess of emotions and shifting alliances in its wake. I wasn't sure how much more of this I could handle, but the situation left us no room for choice, Roberto was a man of routine. He had his own way of doing things, and it became clear from the start that his presence was not merely about financial aid. He took charge of the household finances with a meticulous eye, often scrutinizing every expense. At first, I was grateful for the help, but soon I felt as though my independence was being stifled. Every purchase, no matter how small, seemed to be examined under a magnifying glass, Carlos and Roberto's strained relationship was evident in their interactions, or rather, the lack thereof. They spoke only when absolutely necessary, and even then, Their conversations were curt and loaded with unspoken resentment. I could see how the weight of the past was affecting them, and it made me feel like I was trapped in a delicate balance that could shatter at any moment. One evening, as I prepared dinner, Roberto approached me with a concerned look on his face. "Laura, I need to talk to you about something," he said, his voice low and serious. I wiped my hands on a towel and turned to him, a knot forming in my stomach. "What is it, Roberto?" He hesitated before speaking. "Carlos needs to focus on finding a job. You should consider taking on additional work or cutting back on some expenses. It's the only way we'll make it through this." The words felt like a slap in the face. I was already stretched thin, trying to juggle my part-time job and studies while managing the house. "I'm doing everything I can," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I can't just keep adding more to my plate." Roberto's expression softened, but his resolve remained. "I understand it's hard, but we're in a tough spot. We need to be practical." I nodded, though frustration bubbled beneath the surface. It felt like no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. I wanted to scream, to let out all the pent-up frustration, but I had learned early on that anger only led to more pain. So I swallowed it down and went back to preparing dinner. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself spending more time alone with Roberto. Carlos's job search took him out for long stretches, leaving me to navigate the complexities of our home life with Roberto. What started as a necessity for cooperation began to develop into something more complicated. Roberto and I began to talk more, really talk. He would sit with me during quiet evenings, sharing stories from his past and his perspective on life. I was surprised by how much I enjoyed our conversations. Roberto was thoughtful and had a depth that I hadn't fully appreciated before. He had a way of listening that made me feel heard and understood, something I had been missing in my interactions with Carlos. It was in these moments that I found solace, a quiet escape from the tension and chaos of our everyday struggles. One night, as we sat together on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below us, Roberto said something that stuck with me. "Sometimes, we find ourselves in places we never imagined, Laura. And we have to make the best of it." His words lingered in my mind, creating a sense of unease and curiosity. I wondered if there was something more to this situation than met the eye. But I pushed those thoughts away, focusing instead on the immediate challenges of our lives. Little did I know that the boundaries between us were about to blur in ways that would change everything. The fragile balance we had managed to maintain was about to shatter, and with it, the life I had known. It was during the quiet moments of those early spring evenings that I began to feel the real impact of Roberto's presence. With Carlos out on job interviews or working late on odd projects, Roberto and I found ourselves alone more often than I ever anticipated. The apartment, once so intimate with Carlos, was now becoming a place where I faced my own shifting emotions and uncertainties. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work and school, I came home to find Roberto in the living room, reading a book. He looked up as I entered, his eyes reflecting a kindness that seemed out of place given our circumstances. "You look exhausted," Roberto remarked, setting his book aside. "Why don't you take a seat? I'll make us some tea." I sank into the couch, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle over me. "Thank you," I replied, my voice a mixture of relief and weariness. As he prepared the tea, I took a deep breath, trying to relax. Roberto brought the steaming mugs to the coffee table and sat down next to me. We started talking, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could actually breathe. Roberto's questions were gentle, probing into my hopes and dreams, rather than just the problems and daily struggles. It was a stark contrast to the usual conversations filled with tension and financial woes. Roberto said, stirring his tea thoughtfully, "When I was your age, I was dealing with my own set of challenges. It's easy to feel like the world is closing in, but it's important to remember that things can and often do change." I looked at him, a sense of comfort washing over me. "I'm trying to stay positive, but it's hard when everything feels so out of control." Roberto nodded, his gaze steady. "I understand. Sometimes, it helps to talk about it. Not just the problems, but what you're passionate about, what you want from life." Our conversation drifted to lighter topics, but a newfound ease settled between us. Roberto was not just Carlos's father, he was someone I could confide in, someone who seemed to understand me in a way that Carlos, preoccupied with his own struggles, couldn't. As days turned into weeks, I found myself looking forward to these moments. Roberto's presence was a balm for my frayed nerves, and our conversations grew deeper. He would often join me on the balcony in the evenings, where we would talk about everything from literature to personal dreams. One night, as the stars sparkled above us and a gentle breeze rustled through the trees, Roberto's hand brushed mine accidentally. The contact was brief but electric, sending a jolt through me. I looked at him, startled, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. "I'm sorry," Roberto said, his voice softer than usual. "I didn't mean to, it's okay," I replied, though my heart was racing. There was something different in his gaze, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. The intimacy of our conversations was starting to blur the lines of propriety. I found myself drawn to Roberto in a way I hadn't expected. Our moments together, which began as innocent companionship, were now charged with a deeper, more unsettling tension. I couldn't deny the growing attraction I felt. Each shared smile, every lingering touch, seemed to draw us closer. I knew I was walking a dangerous path, but the solace Roberto offered was too enticing to ignore. It wasn't long before the emotional connection I shared with Roberto began to evolve into something much more intense. The boundary between comfort and attraction grew thinner with each passing day. My heart wrestled with conflicting feelings, torn between the loyalty I felt toward Carlos and the unexpected bond one was forming with Roberto. One afternoon, Carlos came home early from an interview. I was in the kitchen, preparing lunch, when he walked in. The tension in the air was palpable, and I noticed Carlos's gaze dart to Roberto, who was reading a newspaper on the couch. "Hey," Carlos said, his voice strained. "How did it go?" "It went all right," I replied, trying to keep my tone upbeat. "Just the usual, Carlos sighed and began to help himself to a drink. "I'm tired of the usual. I just want something to change." As he spoke, Roberto looked up from his newspaper and offered a sympathetic smile. "We're all in this together, Carlos. Things will get better." Carlos's expression hardened, and he nodded curtly before retreating to the bedroom. The room fell into a heavy silence, and I could feel the tension between us. Roberto came over and put a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You're doing your best," he said softly. "I know it's hard." I turned to him, feeling a wave of emotion surge within me. "It feels like everything is falling apart. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." Roberto's eyes were filled with empathy as he took my hand. "You're stronger than you think." The gesture was innocent enough, but the intimacy of his touch ignited a storm of feelings within me. As the days went on, the line between affection and something more became increasingly blurred. One night, after Carlos had gone to bed, Roberto and I sat together on the balcony, just as we had many times before. The sky was clear, and the city lights shimmered below us. Roberto reached for my hand, and this time, I didn't pull away. Our fingers intertwined, and the connection was electric. "You've been my rock through all of this," I confessed, my voice trembling. "I don't know what I would do without you." Roberto looked at me, his expression a mix of tenderness and longing. "I feel the same way. It's been hard seeing you struggle, and I just want to be here for you." The words hung in the air, charged with an undeniable tension. Roberto leaned in closer, his breath warm against my skin. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of anticipation and fear. I knew we were crossing a line, but the magnetic pull between us was overwhelming. Before I could react, Roberto's lips touched mine in a gentle, exploratory kiss. The moment was brief but electrifying. I pulled back, my mind racing with a whirlwind of emotions. I was overwhelmed by guilt, desire, and confusion. "I'm sorry," Roberto said quickly, his voice filled with regret. "I shouldn't have." "No," I interrupted, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to say." We sat in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over us. I felt a deep sense of turmoil. My feelings for Roberto had crossed into forbidden territory, and I was left grappling with the consequences of that kiss. The boundary between right and wrong was now a tangled mess of emotions and decisions. As I lay in bed that night, my mind raced with questions and uncertainties. I knew I had to confront the reality of my feelings and the impact they would have on my life and those around me. The path ahead was fraught with danger, and I had to decide whether to continue down this treacherous road or pull back before it was too late. The days following that fateful kiss were a whirlwind of confusion and guilt. I found myself haunted by the moment whenever I was alone with my thoughts. I couldn't escape the fact that I had crossed a line with Roberto, someone who had become so significant in my life. Carlos seemed to sense that something was wrong. His behavior oscillated between distracted and suspicious. One evening, he came home early, and the tension was thick as he walked through the door. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, trying to focus on the mundane task to distract myself from the swirling emotions. Hey, what's for dinner? Carlos asked, his voice sounding unusually distant. Just some pasta, I replied, forcing a smile. Nothing special. Carlos didn't respond immediately. Instead, he wandered into the living room and flopped onto the couch with a sigh. I followed him, my heart heavy. The room felt too small, the silence too loud. Is everything all right? I asked, taking a seat beside him. Carlos looked at me with a mixture of concern and something else I couldn't quite identify. I've been feeling like we're drifting apart, he said, his voice tinged with frustration. We don't talk anymore. And it's like you're always somewhere else. I swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. I'm sorry, Carlos. It's just, a lot has been happening. I'm trying to keep everything together. Carlos's eyes softened, but there was still a hint of suspicion. I just wish we could talk more, like we used to. I nodded, but the truth was that the emotional distance between us had become a chasm. The more time I spent with Roberto, the more I realized how different our lives had become. Carlos's struggles were real, but they felt increasingly distant from the solace I found in Roberto's presence. Later that night, Roberto and I were sitting on the balcony, the night air cool and crisp. I needed to talk to him, to process what was happening between us. Our conversation started with small talk but soon veered into deeper territory. I've been feeling so torn, I admitted, staring at the city lights below. Carlos is hurting, and I'm not sure how to fix things. Roberto's expression was one of deep sympathy. I understand. It's never easy to see someone you care about in pain. The conversation drifted, and Roberto's hand found mine again. I looked at him, feeling the familiar pull of attraction. Our kisses had become more frequent, more intense. We were both caught in a storm of emotions, and the line between comfort and betrayal had become almost indistinguishable. Just as I was about to lean in for another kiss, Carlos walked onto the balcony. His eyes flicked between Roberto and me, a look of betrayal and hurt etched on his face. The moment froze, and I felt a wave of panic wash over me. What's going on here? Carlos demanded, his voice shaking with anger and confusion. I felt my heart race as I struggled to find words. Carlos, Carlos's gaze turned to Roberto, his expression one of disbelief. Is this what you've been doing while I've been out trying to fix things? Is this what you wanted? Roberto stood up, his face pale. Carlos, let me explain. Explain? Carlos's voice was raw. There's nothing to explain. I trusted you both, and now, Carlos's anger was palpable, and I felt a deep sense of shame. I had never intended for things to escalate this far, but the damage was done. I'm so sorry, I said, my voice trembling. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It just happened. Carlos shook his head, his eyes filled with hurt. I can't believe this. I thought we were working through this together, and now, without waiting for a response, Carlos turned and stormed back inside. The confrontation had been explosive, and I was left standing on the balcony with Roberto, both of us stunned and unsure of what to do next. Roberto looked at me with a pained expression. I never wanted to hurt him. I never wanted this to happen. I know, I said quietly, tears welling up in my eyes. I didn't either. But it's too late now. The gravity of the situation began to sink in. The trust between Carlos and me had been irrevocably shattered, and the fallout of our actions was only beginning to unfold. The days that followed the confrontation were some of the hardest I've ever faced. The apartment, once a haven, now felt like a prison of guilt and remorse. Carlos's hurt was palpable, and the distance between us had become an abyss. He withdrew into himself, barely speaking to me and avoiding Roberto altogether, I tried to bridge the gap, but Carlos's walls were impenetrable. Every attempt at conversation was met with cold silence or angry outbursts. The tension in the apartment was suffocating, one afternoon, Carlos finally broke his silence. He was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a cup of coffee. I approached him cautiously, unsure of what to expect, Carlos, I said softly, can we talk? Carlos's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of hurt and anger. Talk? What's left to say, Laura? You've already made your choices, his words stung, and I fought back tears. I know I've made mistakes. I just want to understand where we go from here. I don't want to lose you, but I also can't change what's happened, Carlos sighed deeply, his frustration evident. I don't know if we can fix this, Laura. Everything feels so broken. I don't even know if I can trust you anymore, I felt a lump in my throat. I'm so sorry. I never meant for things to turn out this way. I need time to figure things out. I don't want to give up on us, but I understand if you need space, Carlos looked away, his face a mask of pain. I need to think. I don't know what I want right now, with that, he stood up and walked away, leaving me alone in the kitchen, feeling the weight of his words and the crumbling state of our relationship, the next few days were filled with a fragile silence. Carlos avoided me as much as possible, spending long hours outside the apartment. Roberto, too, was distant, his face etched with worry and regret. We tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but the tension was impossible to ignore, one evening, Roberto approached me with a solemn expression. Laura, I think it's time for us to talk about what's next, I nodded, feeling a sense of dread. I agree. Things can't go on like this. We sat down on the balcony, the place where our relationship had begun to shift. The night was quiet, but the weight of our conversation was heavy. I never wanted to come between you and Carlos, Roberto said, his voice filled with remorse. But I can't keep pretending that everything is okay, I took a deep breath. I know. I've been thinking a lot about what we've done and the consequences. Carlos is hurting, and I don't know how to fix things with him. But I also know that our relationship can't continue under these circumstances, Roberto's face was lined with sadness. Maybe it's best if we take a step back. Give Carlos the space he needs and figure out what we really want, I nodded, feeling a pang of sadness. I think you're right. We need to give Carlos the space to heal, and I need to sort through my own feelings, the decision to step back was painful, but seemed to be the only option. We needed to give Carlos the time and space he needed to process everything. And in doing so, we also had to confront our own emotions and the impact of our actions, as the days passed, Carlos began to emerge from his self-imposed isolation. There were still moments of tension, but there was also a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to move forward. The future was uncertain, but the journey of healing had begun, time seemed to stretch endlessly as we navigated the aftermath of the confrontation. The apartment felt like a battleground where the echoes of our past reverberated with every creak and whisper. Carlos continued to distance himself, and Roberto, despite his intentions, could not fully bridge the chasm that had opened between us, one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and bathed the apartment in a warm, golden glow, Carlos finally spoke up. He had been spending more time in his room, and his re-emergence felt both hopeful and ominous, Laura, we need to talk, Carlos said, his voice strained but determined, my heart pounded as I nodded. Of course. Let's talk, we sat in the living room, the space that once held laughter and shared dreams now felt heavy with unresolved emotions. Carlos's eyes were tired but resolute, and I could see the effort it took for him to maintain his composure, I've been doing a lot of thinking, Carlos began, his gaze fixed on a spot on the floor. About us, about what went wrong. I'm still hurt, but I've come to realize that we need to be honest with each other, I braced myself, my emotions a tangled mess. I'm ready to listen, Carlos took a deep breath, his voice breaking slightly. I feel like we lost ourselves in the chaos. We were so focused on trying to survive that we forgot what we had. I've been trying to understand how we got here, and it's clear that we both made mistakes, I nodded, feeling the sting of his words. I know. I've been trying to figure things out, too. I never wanted to hurt you, Carlos. I wish I could take it all back, Carlos's expression softened, but there was still a lingering sadness in his eyes. I'm not sure if we can go back to how things were. The trust is broken, and I don't know if we can repair it. But I want to be honest with you about what I'm feeling, my heart ached as I listened. I understand. I'm not asking for things to go back to how they were. I just want us to be honest with each other and figure out what's next, Carlos sighed, rubbing his temples. I think it might be best if we take some time apart. Not just physically, but emotionally. We need to figure out who we are outside of this relationship. The weight of his words hit me like a tidal wave. The idea of taking time apart was both a relief and a heartbreak. It was a step toward healing but also a painful acknowledgement that our relationship might never be the same, I agree, I said quietly. Maybe some time apart will help us both see things more clearly, Carlos nodded, a mixture of sadness and acceptance in his eyes. I think it's the best decision for now. I need to find my own way, and I think you do, too, The decision to take time apart was made, and with it came a profound sense of loss. We agreed to set boundaries and give each other space to heal. Carlos began staying at a friend's apartment, and the apartment felt eerily empty without him, as the days turned into weeks, I struggled to adjust to the silence. Roberto, too, was dealing with his own emotions. We had agreed to give Carlos the space he needed, but it was becoming increasingly clear that the path forward was fraught with uncertainty, One day, while sitting alone in the apartment, I found myself reflecting on the choices that had led us here. The weight of regret was heavy, but I also felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for healing and growth, as I grappled with the new reality of being alone. An unexpected knock at the door one rainy afternoon brought a new wave of emotions. The sound was so out of place in the silence of the apartment that it made me jump. I opened the door to find a woman standing there, holding a bouquet of flowers. She looked to be in her mid-30s, with an air of elegance that seemed almost out of place. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she looked both determined and apprehensive, Hello, Laura, she said softly, her voice trembling slightly, I stared at her, my heart racing. Yes. Can I help you? The woman took a deep breath. My name is Clara. I'm the woman Carlos has been seeing, the revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. I took a step back, my mind reeling. What are you doing here? Clara's eyes were filled with a mixture of remorse and desperation. I came to talk to you. I know this must be difficult, but I needed to explain, I hesitated but then nodded, gesturing for her to come inside. We settled in the living room, the bouquet of flowers sitting awkwardly between us, I'm sorry to just show up like this, Clara said, her voice trembling. I didn't know how else to reach you. I wanted to be honest about what's been happening, I felt a rush of emotions, anger, confusion, and a strange sense of curiosity. Why should I believe anything you say? You've already hurt me and Carlos, Clara looked down at her hands, taking a moment to compose herself. I understand your anger. I'm not here to make excuses, just to be honest. Carlos and I started seeing each other during a difficult time. I didn't know about your relationship with Roberto until recently. I've been trying to figure out my own feelings and how to move forward, her admission was raw and vulnerable. Carlos never mentioned you. Not once. Why now, Clara's eyes met mine, filled with sincerity. I think it's important for you to know the full picture. Carlos was struggling, and so was I. We both made choices that we regret. But I want you to know that I never intended to hurt you. I was looking for something, and it led me to Carlos, the conversation was difficult, filled with moments of silence and emotional rawness. Clara's presence was a reminder of the complex web of relationships that had become tangled in our lives. Her story added another layer to the already convoluted situation, as the conversation came to a close, Clara stood up, her eyes filled with sadness. I'm sorry for everything. I hope you can find a way to heal and move forward, I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. Thank you for coming here and being honest. Clara left, and I was left alone with my thoughts. The visit had brought a new dimension to the situation, adding another layer of complexity to an already tumultuous time, I spent the evening reflecting on Clara's visit and the impact it had on my understanding of the situation. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but the picture was still far from complete. The path to healing was becoming increasingly clear, but the journey was far from over, it had been a few weeks since Clara's unexpected visit, and the apartment was now a haven of quiet introspection. Each corner of the space seemed to harbor remnants of the past, photographs, mementos, and echoes of laughter that once filled the air. I had been trying to make sense of everything, but the weight of the situation was heavy, One chilly evening, I sat by the window, the city lights shimmering through the rain-soaked glass. I had just finished a long shift at the hospital and was looking forward to some solitude when the doorbell rang. It was late, and the timing made me uneasy. I opened the door to find Roberto standing there, his face etched with concern and determination, "Laura," he said, stepping inside. "I need to talk to you, I could see the strain in his eyes and the urgency in his tone. "Of course. Come in, Roberto sat down on the couch, and I took a seat across from him, sensing that this conversation would be significant. He took a deep breath before speaking, "I've been trying to give you space, but I can't keep this to myself any longer. There's something I need to tell you, my heart skipped a beat." "What's wrong?" Roberto's gaze was intense, and I could tell he was grappling with his own emotions. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything that's happened. And there's something I've realized, I waited, feeling a knot forming in my stomach. "What is it?" Roberto hesitated, then leaned forward, his voice low and earnest. "Laura, I think we need to confront the truth about our relationship. I know we've been through so much, but there are things we haven't fully addressed, his words sent a shiver down my spine. "What do you mean?" "There's been something I've been keeping from you," Roberto said, his voice trembling. "During the time we were together, I've been hiding something. I've been struggling with my own feelings, and I've realized that I've been using you as an escape from my own problems. I love you, but I need to be honest about my own issues, the admission was both shocking and painful. My heart ached as I processed his words. "Roberto, are you saying you're not committed to this relationship?" Roberto's eyes were filled with regret. "No, it's not that I don't care about you. It's just that I've been trying to fill a void in my life with you, and I didn't realize how much I was hurting you in the process. I need to address my own issues before we can move forward." The revelation hit me hard. It felt like another layer of complexity had been added to an already tangled situation. "So, what does this mean for us?" Roberto looked away, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think we both need to take a step back and focus on ourselves. I need to work through my own struggles, and you need to decide what you want for yourself. I don't want to be a burden on you, and I don't want to be unfair to you, tears welled up in my eyes as I struggled to find the right words. "I appreciate your honesty, Roberto. But this is all so overwhelming. I thought we were building something together, Roberto reached out, his hand brushing mine. "We were, and I don't want to lose you. But we need to be honest with ourselves and each other. I need to find my own way, and I want you to find yours, As Roberto left, I felt a profound sense of loss and confusion. The weight of his words was heavy, and the future seemed uncertain. I spent the night reflecting on everything that had transpired, feeling the sting of betrayal and the ache of uncertainty, in the weeks that followed Roberto's departure, I found myself grappling with the reality of being alone once more. The apartment, now a silent witness to my inner turmoil, seemed colder and more distant. I had begun to focus on myself, trying to regain a sense of normalcy amidst the chaos of my emotions, It was during this period of introspection that Carlos reached out to me. He had been quiet for a while, and I wasn't sure what to expect. His message was simple but significant. "Can we meet?" We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe, a place that had once been a favorite of ours. The familiarity of the setting contrasted sharply with the tension that hung in the air. When Carlos arrived, he looked older, his face lined with fatigue and sorrow. "Laura," he said, his voice soft and hesitant. "Thank you for agreeing to meet, I nodded, my emotions a swirling mix of apprehension and curiosity. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Carlos took a seat across from me, his eyes searching for the right words. "I've been doing a lot of thinking About us, about everything that's happened. I've realized that I owe you an apology. I've hurt you in ways that I can't even begin to make up for, the sincerity in his voice was palpable. I appreciate that, Carlos. It's been a difficult time for both of us, Carlos looked down at his coffee cup, his fingers tracing the rim. I've been seeing a therapist, trying to understand my own actions and behaviors. I've come to realize that I was so consumed by my own issues that I didn't see how my actions were affecting you, his words were a revelation, and a small part of me felt a flicker of hope. It's been hard for me, too. I've been trying to figure out where I fit in all of this, Carlos's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of regret and determination. I know. And I want to make amends. I don't expect us to go back to how things were, but I want to find a way to move forward, even if it means starting from scratch, the conversation was difficult but necessary. We talked about our past, our mistakes, and the future we wanted to build, whether together or apart. It became clear that while we both had regrets and unresolved feelings, there was a mutual desire to find closure and understanding, as the meeting drew to a close, Carlos reached out and took my hand, his grip gentle but firm. I hope we can find a way to heal and move forward, whatever that might look like, I nodded, feeling a sense of cautious optimism. I hope so, too. Carlos and I parted ways with a renewed sense of clarity. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. The journey of healing and reconciliation was just beginning, and I was ready to face it with an open heart and mind, the days that followed were a mix of introspection and gradual progress. Carlos and I continued to communicate, working through our feelings and finding a new sense of understanding. Roberto, too, was working on his own path, and though our relationship was complicated, there was a sense of hope that things might eventually fall into place. It had been nearly a year since the tumultuous events of the past, and I was beginning to see a semblance of normalcy in my life. The healing process had been slow, marked by moments of doubt and hope. I had been focusing on my career, personal growth, and rebuilding relationships. The support of friends and the solace of my work at the hospital had been my anchors, one morning, as I was preparing to head to work, I received a call from Carlos. His voice, though still tinged with the echoes of the past, was steady. Laura, he began, I've been thinking a lot about what we've been through, and I want to share something with you, I could hear the sincerity in his voice. Sure, Carlos. What is it? I've been working on rebuilding my life, and I've found a new direction. I've been offered a position with a new company, and it feels like a fresh start for me. I wanted to let you know because I think it's important that we both move forward with a sense of closure and hope. His words were a mix of relief and anticipation. That's great to hear. I'm glad you're finding a new path for yourself. Carlos paused before continuing. I also wanted to thank you for the conversations we've had. They've helped me a lot in understanding myself better and in finding a sense of peace. I hope you're doing well, too, the genuine tone of his words brought a smile to my face. I appreciate that, Carlos. I'm doing well, focusing on my work and trying to build a future for myself, as we ended the call, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The unresolved tension between us had finally begun to dissipate, and I could see a future that was no longer defined by past pain, later that week, I received an invitation from Roberto. He wanted to meet and discuss our future. I agreed, curious about where our relationship stood after all that had happened, when we met, Roberto appeared calm and composed, though his eyes revealed a depth of emotion. Laura, he said softly, I've been doing a lot of thinking and reflecting on our time together. I've come to realize that our relationship was a pivotal part of my life, and I want to be honest about where I am now, I nodded, sensing the gravity of his words. What's on your mind? Roberto took a deep breath. I've been working on my own issues and trying to understand what I truly want from life. I've come to a place where I realize that I need to focus on my own healing and growth. I don't want to be a distraction or an obstacle in your life, his words were both heartfelt and heartbreaking. I understand, Roberto. I've been on my own journey of healing and self-discovery. It's been a challenging but rewarding experience. Roberto reached out and took my hand. I want you to know that I care about you deeply and that I'll always cherish the time we had together. I hope we can both find the happiness we're searching for, even if it means going separate ways, tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded. Thank you, Roberto. I wish you all the best in your journey, as we parted ways, I felt a sense of closure and acceptance. The love and pain we shared had shaped who we had become, and I was ready to embrace the future with a renewed sense of hope and determination, years had passed since the dramatic changes in my life, and I had settled into a place of contentment and fulfillment. The journey had been long and arduous, but it had led me to a place where I could look back with a sense of peace and gratitude, I was now living in a cozy house with Roberto and our adopted daughter, Isabella. Our life together was a testament to the resilience of love and the power of forgiveness. The challenges we faced had only strengthened our bond, and we had built a family that was a source of joy and inspiration, One sunny afternoon, as I played with Isabella in the garden, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The laughter of my daughter and the warmth of Roberto's presence were reminders of the beauty that can emerge from even the most painful experiences, As I watched Isabella run around the garden, her laughter filling the air, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The past had been filled with trials, but it had also been a journey of self-discovery and growth. I had learned to embrace the complexities of life and to find happiness in the present moment, Later that evening, as Roberto and I sat together on the porch, enjoying a quiet moment, I turned to him with a smile. It's amazing how far we've come, isn't it? Roberto looked at me with a soft smile. Yes, it is. We've been through so much, but we've come out stronger on the other side. I took a deep breath, feeling the serenity of the moment. I'm grateful for everything we've experienced. It's led us to where we are now, and I wouldn't change a thing, Roberto reached out and took my hand. Neither would I. The journey has been worth it, and I'm thankful for the love and support we've found in each other, as we sat together, watching the sunset paint the sky with hues of orange and pink, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The past was a chapter of growth and transformation, and the future was a canvas waiting to be filled with new experiences and joys, Our story was one of love, loss, and redemption. It had taught us that even in the face of adversity, there is always a path to healing and happiness. And as I looked at the life we had built together, I knew that the journey had been worth every moment, the cycles of pain and healing had brought us to a place of harmony and fulfillment. And as we continued to build our life together, I carried with me the lessons learned and the hope that no matter where life's twists and turns led, love and understanding would always light the way.